Hi, this is Jess Dewell, your host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. You're listening to Align Business Values and Activities. This is the right conversation for you, provided you are interested in continuing to expand how you think, get new ideas, and you're facing your own needs in not only personal development, but business development, and you've got some problems that you are working on solving. As business leaders, we must discuss, and all of the guests on the show contribute to the conversation of what it means to be an effective leader today. We are building cultures of tenacity, specifically from the self-work we do and the way that we show up for our teams. I thought that this show was necessary because we hear out there in the world so many conflicting things. People talk about love and loyalty and results. All those things have different meanings based off of our own personal experience. So how do we take business values, right? Trustworthiness, productivity, loyalty being some of the top ones that you see across companies in the U.S., how are they displayed in everyday workflows? That's what this conversation is about. Joining me today is Ryan Marchman, and Dr. Ryan is a teacher, healer, and philosopher in Boulder, Colorado. He's the founder of the Adjustatorium, a vitalistic chiropractic practice. He travels to speak and teach on the subjects of health, human behavior, potential, and chiropractic mastery. We'll be right back after this.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
Ryan, how do you ensure your personal values are aligned with your company and its activities?
Because I created my company, I don't have to make sure that my personal values are aligned with my company. I built my company around my personal values. So as an entrepreneur, that gives an advantage in that way because I'm in control of the values that my company expresses. I would say if somebody who is working for a company wanted to make sure that their values were aligned with that company's values, it's going to be very difficult because if you're trying to live out somebody else's values that aren't in alignment with who you really are, you're going to always be bumping up against yourself, and eventually you're going to find yourself at odds with the company and you'll probably want to quit.
I'm in a different camp. I didn't actually write down any values for my company for the first half of its existence, right? The first 7-ish years I had no company values. And I was running it, I think, from my values, but I didn't ever have my personal values written down either. And once I wrote down the personal values, I realized, well, shoot, there are things that I must do. There are things that I must be able to articulate that if I don't make some company values, the values around the service that I am providing, the service of the team that I am creating, the product and whatever that's coming from a direction, how do people buy into it at all? How is there space for somebody else to join in? How is there the opportunity for somebody else to bring in their vision and find out what their impact could be using Red Direction as part of their platform and their self-discovery and their contribution and being fulfilled and being part of something bigger? And so I went the other direction. I was like, well, I guess I better have some company values, and I'm pretty sure I can't have a whole bunch of mini-me's running around because that's unrealistic. So what do I do? How do I go about doing that? And so I decided to go through that process, and there are a lot of processes out there to do that. I created one on my own because nothing that was out there really satisfied what I was looking for that would help me find my personal values and company values and be comfortable that I could show up with my personal values to my company values. And when I was able to find that process, I was like, oh, check this out. Somebody else can come in, a vendor that I choose. I know the types of questions to ask to make sure that they're not doing something or spending money in a way that is against me personally or against my business and its values. And so now I have this connection point, which I think, and I could be wrong about this because, you know, every day is a new experiment, I think that the company values that are there are doing their job today for Red Direction. Everybody has a voice, everybody has a say, everybody has the ability to share and figure out and think about, and I'm asking them to hold. How do we do the best us, the best service, the best results, the outcomes for our clients? How do we do that? Tell me from your perspective, and our audience from your perspective, is it the same then when you're yourself, or did you have to go through a similar process to define what your values were?
Planted a flag for your business.
Yes.
This is what Red Direction stands for. But my point was that if you are not in alignment with what Red Direction stands for, you wouldn't be able to support it.
Exactly, and you'd find out pretty quick. Or, I don't know, some people are really good at window dressing, and some people are really good at slyly making you feel like kind of it's supposed to be a certain way and it's not.
For me, it's about authenticity and really aligning with who you really are, and that's what it comes down to when I teach people how to run a business. The process of starting my current business and then my seminar business on the side too. Because I was already studying my own personal values, I had a starting point. For you started your company before you delved into that process. But for me, it was kind of concurrent at the same time. The purpose of my business is different from my life purpose, I would say. But if my values couldn't support my business, then I wouldn't be able to run this business. If you find yourself constantly unfulfilled and at odds with what you're doing for a living, that means it's not aligned with your values. You need to find something else to do. When I interview vendors or when I interview potential employees or anybody who was going to work with or represent my business, you were talking about your business values gives you an idea of whether or not they're going to be in alignment with you or not, and that's true. And I have to add an element that the one interview question that I start out everybody with, no matter who they are, is, it's a very simple one. You've probably heard it before. If money were no object, what would you be doing right now? And if they say anything other than what they're there to be interviewed for, I don't let them come on board because they're not in alignment with their own highest self. And I want them to find that rather than try and do a job for me that they're not in alignment with. I'd rather find somebody who is in alignment with that job and is going to do the best job and frees that person up to go and discover what they really want.
I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about people who have a business and a side hustle, or they work for somebody else and they have a side hustle. How does that show up in the interview question, and how do you factor in something like that?
Sometimes you're not in the right job, but the job allows you to do what you really love, so you can then value that job. So I'm not eliminating that possibility, of course. So I want to make sure that the person is living the kind of life where they're really expressing what they truly desire to be doing. I don't want a part-time doctor. I want a doctor who loves his job and does it and even after he retires, still sees patients. Just because it's so deeply ingrained and aligned with the values that the person can't help but do that job. That's my ideal candidate for any job.
I know I can never have the best idea. And so when we're talking with each other, and I always assume the best of everybody, which is a blessing and a curse, I always believe that people give everything that they have in the moment they're in, which is another blessing and a curse. Mm-hmm. Right? And so in that case, I'm wondering if, you said your first interview question is, if money were no object. I've heard of that question before. I don't use that. Makes me wonder, maybe there's a different question, or the questions that I'm asking could show up in a different order to let me see if there's a misalignment, since I automatically go to the positive. I automatically go, something decided to put you in this space, to decide to do this test run of a project with me, to decide that we could actually work together. I've already set it up that you've jumped through all those hoops and you're willing to do what I am asking you to do. So of course.
Yeah.
And it may not always make the best business sense, but it tends to, it works more than it doesn't, for me anyway.
What I always tell people is that business problems are personal problems in disguise. So I don't see a difference between business decisions and personal decisions. When you talked about, it may not be the best business decision. What I'm looking for in my people is that not just somebody who is qualified to do the job, but who wants to do that job and who likes to do that job for a living. For example, if I was to hire a graphic designer, there are plenty of people who are good at graphic design but hate their job and wish they could do something else. Mm-hmm. But my particular designer loves doing design. She's an artist at heart, and they have a good business doing it. So I want to hire that person because she's in alignment with what she's doing. And even if she wasn't a professional designer, she'd be drawing something. That's what she likes to do. So that's my point about if money were no object, what would you be doing? And if somebody says, well, I'd move to Hawaii and surf, I wouldn't be doing this. Then I want to find out how they can get to Hawaii and surf and not work for me. Mm-hmm. Not that they wouldn't be a good employee for me, but I want my other people to be in alignment with who they really are also. So it's almost selfish of me to take that person on as an employee and take advantage of their skills when it's unfulfilling to them.
We're talking about responsibility at this point. There's a stewardship, and I talk about this in relationship to business because I agree with you about business decisions and personal decisions. We make good personal decisions and we make good business decisions, or we make not good, poor business decisions and poor life decisions. I think that decision-making process is key throughout. Do you think it changes then from the perspective of being the center versus putting the flag in the ground and having everybody come rally around the flag? Is there a difference then being a steward in each scenario to you?
You know, your vision for your organization may not be your vision for your life, right? And there may come a day whenever you pass your organization on, and it's got its own life force, more or less. Whereas if you're representing your personal brand and your own life, and you need assistance to help you with that, you know, that's a different, there's a little bit different process. What it comes down to when you're talking about aligning your personal values with the values of your company, I really think that's kind of a backwards way to look at it. If the values of the company are such that they're not aligned with your personal values, changing yourself to match them is a losing proposition. You already have your highest values, whether you know them or not. They're the things that you're automatically driven to do. And you'll eventually default towards those values and away from what are the values that you've been trying to do because you think you should because it supports the company.
I think about loyalty. Loyalty can mean doing what you say you're going to do. Loyalty can mean showing up, being in the space or taking up space. Right? I mean, those are just two definitions of the word loyal. And if we have different background experiences and we're using the term loyal as a business value, and of course that then says, well, do my personal values include loyalty? Okay, good. What's my experience around that? And I show up, and my experience around loyalty is different than the way that it's being presented or done in a particular scenario. Well, it's a recipe for disaster. Maybe not immediate disaster, but eventually implodedness of frustration, anger, which results in turnover or just unhappy, poor quality work. And so I hear what you're saying. I got to ask you though, what would you do if money were no object?
If money were no object, I would travel, I'd teach, I would do my reading and research, and I would see patients, which is exactly the life that I've designed through my businesses. I have a seminar business. I just finished writing a book. I travel and teach my seminars, and I see people here in the office. And those are my highest values. Those are the things that I would be doing anyway, so I just figured out a way to get paid for it.
So you're living the dream. Love that. You know, we live the dream too. Same thing. If I were that, I would be a Girl Scout leader. I'd probably have 2 or 3 Girl Scout troops, and I'd be really involved in the local community. And, and of course of that, other things would come. I would probably do this, and it may be called something different, and the focus may not be business, but it would still be around effective leading and being bold. And, I'm not a super fan of the word authenticity just because it's got a buzz around it right now. And that's the only reason. However, the way that you use it, and anybody listening to this program, go back, search for Ryan Marchman's name. See the other programs he's been on because he is a repeat guest here. We like what he has to say, and he's filled with knowledge. And here's the scoop. The scoop is we have something to learn from each other, and I think that's the piece of it. Okay, so another thing you said, I wrote it down because I liked it so much. I almost giggled out loud because it tickled me. I'm in the business of alignment. I thought that was phenomenal and was it particularly done that way to be a play on words?
Yes, yeah. And it's often what I teach because I teach a lot of chiropractors. And chiropractors tend to be hyper-focused on the job that they do. And they forget to see the bigger picture, which is, you're not just seeing people in your office. When you correct somebody's spine, you're bringing them into closer alignment with how they're supposed to function, right? You're bringing their brain into closer alignment with how they're supposed to function. And since the brain is responsible for all the functions of life, you're bringing their life into closer alignment with how they're supposed to be. And if you look at it in a broader scope, that really is my job through my teaching, through interviews like this, through the work I do in my patients. It's not to get sick people well, although I do that. My job is to bring people into closer alignment with who they really are, how they're supposed to be. And so since alignment is often the word people use to associate with chiropractors, I use that, kind of tongue-in-cheek.
And I don't know why it reminds me of this, but anything that catches my eyes like that. Like, so one of the things that I will be speaking about next week is personal values, right? I'm a big believer in personal values, and the work that I'm doing and the conversations that I'm having and the people that I'm hearing and talking to and presenting to, a lot of them, like you said, you know, they know their values because they're acting in accordance with that. They think in accordance to it. They judge in accordance to the values that they have. They've never written them down. And the power of writing them down and being able to look at them externally, there's a value there. There's a value for the values. How's that for an interesting thing? And so the topic is, it's called Bring Your Values to Life, and then in parentheses, and work. And the concept being the animation of it, animating. What actions can you start noticing in your life? What patterns can you just see? There's nothing to do about patterns at first except for to recognize they exist and find them. Do you have tips or ideas of how people can do that? How do we start looking at our lives in a way to just notice patterns?
The easiest way that I know of is called the DeMartini method, and it's Dr. John DeMartini's website. I'm not sure what his website is, but you can look up the DeMartini method. And he, on his website, has a values finder program that's free. And he basically asks you simple questions like, what do you spend most of your time doing when you're left to your own devices? What do you spend time thinking about, not just daydreaming about, but thinking about that actually you bring about? What do you spend your time talking about? What do you surround yourself with in your physical space? And I think there is a series of questions along those lines where you just observe yourself in your own life, and you'll find out, whether you knew it or not, what is most important to you. And what often that you'll find is that it's not what you think that it was. So you used the word loyalty, and I used the word authenticity a couple moments ago. Those are what I call social platitudes. Those are things that people think are their values, but they're really just an impression about how we think we should feel. Our true values are what we express in our own lives, and that's not something like love and gratitude and loyalty. They're things like, what do you, for example, I love to teach and I love to learn, and those are, I surround myself with books, and I'm constantly setting up new seminars. You know, so those are things that are actually expressed in my life that if someone from the outside was to take notes on me, they would see as important to me, right? And you'll start to take those notes on yourself, and you'll find your list of values. And like I said, very often they're not what you think that they were. And when you...
I've got to look behind the curtain because I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about my values, and I'm going to see if they line up. So keep talking, and I'm going to look behind this curtain.
Okay. Yeah, so what you surround yourself with and the rest, you'll find out that your highest values they can change over time. They can change throughout your lifetime. So it's a good idea to do this exercise periodically. But your highest values have been at odds with what you think they should be. And that's why it's been so difficult. So when you find out what truly inspires you, what you truly would rather spend your time doing, and then you align your life and your business or your role at a business with those highest values, it'll become an automatic process for you, and that's when that's when you have the endless vacation, right? Work becomes fun, and you're not doing things that you don't want to do. For example, I don't like to do paperwork. It's not one of my highest values, and left to my own devices, paperwork doesn't get done. So I could force myself to do it and be unfulfilled, or I could find somebody who has that skill and value and enjoys doing that sort of thing and hire them, which I did. And that's the biggest and best way to align your personal values with your company values. Figure out what roles that you play automatically. Play to those strengths. Those are your values. And then figure out how to make your job just doing those things.
Here are my top 3 values. They are curiosity, elegance, and truth. Okay, so if you were to look around my space right here, right, this office that I'm in, I'm also surrounded by books. I love to read. I love to look things up. I don't like technology, so there I have actual physical books. Instead, I'm thinking about elegance, and I'm not necessarily that organized. And if you were to look at the space I'm in, I have no less than probably 20 piles that only mean something to me around this office. However, that said, I'm a very tactile, auditory learner. So having those piles allows me to quickly and assimilate the information that I need and then process it while I'm working with other information. So there's a system behind it. And so I'm thinking, oh, here we go. How cool is that? I got close. I'm sure I could spend more time and go into a little bit more detail, like I'm sure the Martini method, the DeMartini method does. But on the surface, just thinking about that concept, I think everybody that's listening could do that and take a look and see, what do I do? What do I do? What am I surrounded with? And how am I interacting with those things? Because I like pretty things too, elegant. Something is elegant, it's simple, it's straightforward, never tactless, so that's like something I aspire to.
Yeah. So you've just demonstrated how, I'll make an example because I'm not going to assume this about you, but you talked about how you have these stacks of things and that helps you in the way you work. But if you had a value impressed upon you, for example, of we need to be organized and I need to organize this crap, then you would actually be making yourself less good at your work.
Yes.
Because you're doing something in the active organization that you don't want to do, and it would take away from the way you've automatically built your life according to your values, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the key point that I'm talking about is when it comes to aligning yourself with your values, it's not the idea of the values, it's the expression of them. It's how you really make them available in your life.
I can give you an example of one that doesn't work. For me, it's schedules. I hate schedules. I hate it so much. I refuse to make a commitment in the moment for anything, and I always put it into the future. Mm-hmm. And then the future comes, and I'm like, what was I thinking? I don't like it today either, about 25% of the time. And it just occurred to me. Sometimes I accidentally double book, and sometimes I just don't like the thing. And sometimes I can't figure out a way to like it, to get through it, because I made a commitment, and that's also something that's important to me. I'm going to do what I said I was going to do, even if I don't like it, because I thought I would like it, or I made an agreement. I'm starting to give myself a little bit of permission to go, what's actually going to happen if I don't do this?
Right.
And pause. What is the worst thing that could happen? And we're all human. I mean, the fact that we all have things happen, the fact that we're all learning as we go. And sometimes, we have to fall down in order to recognize that something is out of place. We're clunking around instead of seamlessly flowing in space. And, people talk about flow. And I believe in flow, and I've been there. However, it's also something that it takes work and practice. It also requires time of non-interruption. And so I'm thinking about myself, and I'm thinking about listeners, and I'm thinking about anybody anywhere on their journey that we could probably all, and I could say this probably all, would benefit from stopping and pausing more often, or stopping and pausing longer, maybe one of the two.
Have you ever made plans with your friend, and then the weekend comes around and you're like, I don't want to do this?
Sometimes.
But then you text them and they say, oh, thank God that I didn't want to do that either.
Okay, that's never happened to me. But
right. Very often when you get those feelings, the best thing to do is to cancel, right? Or you're sitting at home and you're like, God, I hope this person cancels because I don't want to deal with this. Well, that's a sign that you should probably cancel it. It's not in alignment with you right now. Yep. Now I know there are important things to do with your keeping your commitments too. Yeah. So there's a balance there. You can't just be a flake on everything.
Means I probably don't recognize my true values quite enough if I have to flake on everything, right?
Correct. No, that's what I was saying. So you nailed it. If you keep scheduling things that are not in alignment with your values, then you're going to keep bumping up against the fact that you don't want to do them. So figure out where the rub is, and then stop doing those things and fill those spaces with the things you really do want to do. And ultimately, that's kind of like if I had a vision for what everybody in their life could do forever, that's what I want them to do, is figure out what are the most important things to them and then plug those into their lives and don't do anything else. And there are a few ways to change your values if you see that your highest values are not support of what you really want. But man, that's difficult. Yeah. And it takes a lot of time. And anytime you inject values from the outside into yourself and you try to live those values, you're going to be ultimately unfulfilled. The best way to do is figure out how you are and who you are, get that list of values going, the top 5, 6, 7, 8 maybe, and then don't do anything besides those things.
Now I'm thinking about people in organizations. So I'm thinking about the 20-somethings and early 30-somethings that are struggling to find jobs. Mm-hmm. I'm also thinking about the directors, VPs, senior vice presidents that have been doing what they do for a very long time.
Yeah.
In both cases, sometimes it depends. I mean, there's a lot of ways to go about this, but depending on what the philosophy is and what the priorities are and what the personal expectations are, there's no judgment here. There's just, you find yourself in a place where I'm going to take it because I need to use skills to make money, to pay rent and eat.
Yeah.
And maybe walk my dog if I have a dog, or, my prescriptions, or whatever the case may be. And by the way, if you're on prescriptions, you got to go see somebody like Ryan, because there's a way around that. But that's a whole other conversation. Yeah. So we find ourselves in this situation, and we're not sure how to get out of it. So we've got to, one, figure out the culture we're in. Two, whether we like it or not, sometimes we're in survival mode. And if we can recognize the survival mode, we might even be able to turn it into something where we could learn and grow and use it as a stepping stone to where we want to go or what we want to do. But it's easy to say. It's so easy to say. Do you have any real life examples and experiences that you could share with us around this?
A couple things to unpack around that. But the first one is that I was reading just in the last couple of days, one of my favorite books is called The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles. And he says, there is no man who was so misplaced that he could not get into the right place. So first of all, don't look at yourself and say, well, I'm in this terrible corporation and I'm stuck here and I can't get what I really want because I have this dead-end job and I can't quit it because I have to pay the rent. So don't have that limiting belief around your job. Don't look at the job as being in the way or as an obstacle. Look at it as being on the way. It may not be the perfect job, but it's the perfect job for right now. Because then once you got your feet under you and you're paying the rent, you can start putting creative energy towards what you really do want. And so that's a huge first step. In my book, which is a book about prosperity, I talk about, at first, if you don't have a job and you're on the verge of being homeless, or maybe you are homeless, you don't have any penny, don't hold out for the perfect job. Get any job that is going to give you the momentum to move forward in your life and start building the kind of life that is in support of your values. Right? You're never so misplaced that you can't eventually get into the right place, and that's what I want to impress.
So I really appreciate what you're saying, is that we can grow where we're planted, knowing we can always be moved. I saw something on the news where in Japan there was a 600-year-old cedar tree, and it was flooding in the area that it was at, and they figured out how to get it into they built a thing to carry it up the hill, and they lowered the track, right? They built the track, they lowered this thing down, they hooked this tree to it, and they moved it up the hill so that it wouldn't get washed away or die in this flood. And it made me think, how cool of us to be able to appreciate the beauty around us, even when it seems elusive or everyone around us will take away a convenient way instead of, I'm going to say the way, because there's a whole bunch of, however you define value, it fits in there. And I'm all about, there's an element of beauty to everything. And if we are doing the wrong things, we lose the beauty within ourselves. I call it the heart light. Our heart light dims.
Yeah, that's what I call alignment. When you're not in alignment with yourself, you get basically what amounts to negative emotion.
Yeah.
You feel bad. And so part of it is whenever you're in a situation, how do you turn your thoughts towards good feeling emotions? How do you become grateful for what you do have? That's kind of the first step in that job that's on the way and not in the way. You may not be in an ideal situation now, but that doesn't mean that you can't get into one. But the more you keep thinking about how bad it is, the more you're going to be kind of stuck in that rut. You really got to start turning your mind towards the beauty in the situation. And it may be hard to see at first, but at least you can look out the window and see some grass or something, right? And start there.
Let's talk about just the definition of value, because I've realized, talking with business owners and executives and actually anybody in a company that I'm having a conversation with, and I start asking, so what do you do? What's the meaning of what you do? And then I'll say, so how does it add value to the product of your company, whatever that product is, right? And I get a variety of answers. And what I find is that my value, right, this is kind of something I've started to discover, my value is different than the value of my contribution, which is different than the way that it is perceived, which is called the added value, which overall creates the value of the company or the organization or the moment or the product. And those are all very different, and it's really hard to break those apart. So I'm still right in this building and gathering information and having conversations around it so that I can unpack it more and figure out how it shows up in a life, because when we're talking with a business partner, when we're talking with a potential investor, when we're talking with a potential key employee, whoever that might be, when we define things differently, we have no idea we're running in opposite directions. And to me, the moment we find those opposite directions or even just off course with each other, what do we tend to do? We tend to chalk it up. It's just this time. Oh, don't even worry about it. Or we avoid that says negative. I can't deal with this. My experience says I'm not. There's too much fear around this. I'm going to avoid it. I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist. And then what? It gets deeper in addition to wider. And we have these problems. So when you are working with business owners that are stuck, right? What would you suggest to them because usually sometimes stuck can be because they're turning their wheels, but sometimes stuck could be because everybody's running in different directions and there's nowhere to go, because think about like that parachute game we used to play on field day. You can't pull one direction without everybody else in the thing pulling back, and nobody moves. The parachute never moves. And the whole point is to have movement and momentum is what you're talking about.
You brought up basically what I call the limitations of language, which are that our ideas can never be fully expressed through words. Words are kind of the intermediary between thought world and physical world. We use our words to kind of get in between those things, but they never fully do the job. That's why philosophers write thousands and thousands and thousands of pages to describe one idea, and they still never completely get it across. So when you talk about something like values, or even the definition of specific values, like you were mentioning before, loyalty, truth, what does that mean to different people? Right. What does the word value mean to different people? And getting to that definition before the conversation starts can sometimes be important. Like in a legal document, you'll often see the plaintiff is defined as blah, blah, blah. So further use in this document, it means that. And the defendant is this person, blah, blah, blah. They'll lay out the terms ahead of time so there's no misunderstanding about what was meant by the rest of the document. So sometimes whenever you're working with business owners, you want to define your idea as you understand it before using it with that person. An alternate route is to pick for the idea you're looking for and see what they call it, and then call it that from now on, with the conversation with that person. Some people don't call values values. Some people call it worth. What's decided on worth? What is it valued? There are what we call personal values, are things that we think are important, or things that we feel are important. That's something that we value, so that's why they're called values. However, the value of a product might have nothing to do with one of those values. It could be a market value, like for something like chocolate or coffee. The value is determined by the market. If it has to do with a skill or a service, the value is determined by however much the person purchasing it needs it. When you come up against the limitations of language, you really got to understand, I'm never going to be able to say this the way it really is. What do I need this person to understand? What do I need this person to understand? Then you can get towards that, kind of having a goal in mind. Begin with the end in mind, so to speak. And then when a person is telling you something and they're using a word differently than you normally use it or whatever, ask yourself the same question, reflective. What does this person need for me to understand? And you may need to ask them that. You can just say, I don't understand the way you're using that word, and then ask them, how are they using it? Getting past that initial hump in communication with somebody and understanding the way they use language goes a long way towards the beginning of a kind of a coaching or relationship where you're trying to help them through, but you just don't understand them.
And which needs are being met or not met, right? I mean, if somebody needs connection and they're feeling disconnected, it's going to cause the language they use to shift, and we may not understand or be able to get on the same page with them or ourselves. And when I say them, I'm including me and the them in that part, because I am totally, I totally fall into that category. When one of my basic needs is not met, I show up differently. I don't think I show up differently, but I can tell in the people around me that something is different. And one of the things that I believe in around awareness is, as soon as everybody else starts acting different, the first thing I need to do is hold up the mirror, provided I'm willing. And if I'm not willing, I just have to accept that everybody's acting different, but I can't question them about what they're doing or how their things are happening without taking a look at myself and asking, what's happening here too? And to me, that's a part of character building, that we have to have our own character, and we're defining it by how we show up, are we able to communicate, things like that. And it actually made me think of an example where we're having a communication issue. And I'm going to use my family as an example, because this is what's coming to mind, and we're dealing with these things, right? I have a 7-year-old who's learning how to communicate, and he has a voice. And if he doesn't get a voice, And if other people don't use their voice, we've got conflict. And the biggest part is other people not using their voice. He totally misses the cues. Some of, who knows, whatever this is for. He's missing the cues. And so we started working with a thing where somebody will say, well, don't you think we should stay inside? And really they want to stay inside. But they're not saying, I want to stay inside. They're saying, don't you think we should? Well, we really need to be doing this. Well, Carter's used to having a voice. And so we come up with this conflict. Or, don't you think you should eat that lunch right now? Really, it's, eat your lunch or go hungry. That's kind of the place we're at. So people are asking him questions as quote-unquote guidance, but there's already an answer. And so this is something that, by the way, I unlearned, and I'm still unlearning this. We call out habits in our house. So I call this on myself now, at least I can see it. Both the other two people, right, my son and my husband, were like, what do you mean? You asked me a question and I gave you an answer. And I'm like, no, I already had the answer. And I'm like, oh, right. So first we found the pattern. Then I realized at the end, I started to say, hey, nope, that actually wasn't a question. There's no discussion, no decision to be made. Let's just do this. And then the third is, okay, so that moment when I'm going to do that, I'm like, ooh, I see myself going to ask this question? I can ask the question, am I willing to have the answer? And if not, I must choose a different path. And what that allowed me to do within my family was to recognize I did that at work. I did that with my team. I did that with my vendors. And then I walk away from the conversation feeling all kinds of gross and grouchy and unfulfilled because I didn't get anything I wanted out of that conversation. I felt like I was walked over. Well, duh. How does anybody else know that I'm doing anything else than asking a question? Don't you think it should be like this? What if it was like this? And, good questions that theoretically support dialogue. If you're going into a conversation or a negotiation with a vendor, let's just use that, and something's not right, and you start asking questions about how they do things, what's going to happen? They could get defensive, or they could say, well, this is just the way that it is. Either way, it's not the outcome I wanted in that negotiation. I wanted to open up a conversation to fix a problem. So I had to change how I showed up. Do you know of or see on a regular basis, I'm glad to have used myself as that example, but that where communication, the limitation of communication comes in and shows up in places that we might not even know we have these patterns.
I like what you said because you basically demonstrated the principle of saying what you really mean. I don't know when it happened, but at some point in our development of our language, we associated directness with rudeness. But it's the only way to be honest is direct communication. So rather than say, well, wouldn't you rather go to Mario's for dinner? I should say, well, I'm feeling like pasta. I want to go to Mario's for dinner. And then you can say, well, yes or no. But this passivity with which we ask questions and then we're disappointed with the answers, to me, I think if you're asking a question, like you said, you should be okay with the answer, whatever it is, even if you don't agree with it. A question is investigative. You want to find out the answer. If a question is not investigative, if you're trying to pry out the answer that you want, then it's manipulative.
Ooh, is that a touchy subject?
That's a big problem for a lot of business owners, especially when they're afraid of losing customers. Because if they feel like if they're direct with a customer, especially if their answer isn't what the customer wants it to be, that they're going to lose the customer's respect or whatever, when the opposite is actually true. And they're also afraid of, their spouse. They're afraid of whoever is going to give them an answer that they don't want or whatever. Sometimes people will remark at me about the way I say no. Because sometimes people will ask a question and I'll just say no.
You're not supposed to do that, Ryan.
Right,
actually, I didn't even ask you a question and you said no when I'm having a reaction. I mean, it's true. It's true. It's embedded. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really the only answer to that question. Mm-hmm. But because it's not couched in something that is really polite and gentle, it brings up something in people that they think is not supposed to happen. It was Gandhi said that I think there's no worse lie than a no that's disguised as a yes or something like that. It's really true. Sometimes you just have to be willing to say no, and it's what I call, Stuart Weil called it, your word is law. Oftentimes we talk about affirmations and we speak into existence what we want to have in life and so on. But if you're constantly telling lies, how is your subconscious going to get on board with what I'm saying is the truth? If you say I'm going to be there at 8 and you're not there at 8, then your subconscious mind is saying, okay, so what we say really doesn't come true. If somebody asks you, do you want this seat? And you go, no, it's fine, you keep the seat, but you really want the seat, you're lying again. It's a fear of being perceived as selfish. I'm not saying selfishness as associated with greed is a good thing, but taking care of oneself, giving yourself a voice about what you really want is really the only way to get what you really want. You got to be honest with yourself and honest with other people.
I actually have a book that teaches you how to become selfish in this world of politeness and please read my mind, and even more so, I expect you to read my mind. There's not even a please in there. I agree with you about the word no, and in fact, that's another thing I'm practicing. Isn't this great? It doesn't matter that I run a company or a radio show or that I show up and I'm a Girl Scout leader and a mom and a whatever, and you're, a chiropractor that does speaking and teaching, and you're out in the community and you're so active. We're practicing every single day, and in my opinion, when we embrace that practicing, it's the willingness to learn, we stay open. And that openness, I think, gets us farther because then we can go, oh, well, how come I didn't get what I want? Oh, okay. Or when you watch an interaction, because this is the best, right? I pretend, have you ever seen, Science Theater 3000 or something like that, where the two little guys, it's a mute movie and the two little guys are in the corner and they're dubbing and talking about what these people are saying on the screen. I love to do that in real life because when we watch interactions between people when we're out, we can see the nuances of content, moody, angry, frustrated, sad, surprised, the whole list of emotions. And the more we watch and observe, the more when we see it in front of us, now we get to be inquisitive on that front too. Oh, I just said something and I caused that person to look like whatever they look like, and then I can associate that with things I've seen in the body language, so out and about. And being able to be open to some of that gives us more context. And we are a little busy in this world that we live in, and when we don't pause, I mean, we were talking about pausing before, when we don't pause, what happens? We miss cues, and as fast as the world is and amazing and as efficient as we can be as humans, when we miss the cues, we forget what they look like. And when we forget what they look like, the politeness, I'm not making an excuse for the politeness or a no disguised as a yes. I'm saying it would be easier for somebody to see that there's something not being said, and both parties have the opportunity to speak up.
I come from the South, where everyone is polite to a fault, and they disguise insults as compliments. If you say anything that's direct, it's really perceived as rude, and we don't talk about that. And it's coming from that environment, growing up, into discovering how to have a voice and speak my truth. I think that what you're talking about is the self-reflection and time to stop and really observe what happens in people when they're aligned with their truth versus when they're not aligned with their truth is extraordinarily valuable. And of course, it starts by observing yourself, because whenever you're in conversation with someone and you can see where you've been, because in the past you used to hold back what you meant to say, and then you can start to see this person holding back what they meant to say, then you can catch it out of them. I think when we as business owners really get better and more concise at articulating what we really want, business is going to go a lot smoother. And that comes back to the conversation of values that we started with. When we can ask our employees for what we want, rather than try and suggest things that they should do or ways that they should be, ask our employees for what they want and then let them provide us with what they want in whatever way fulfills their values. I think businesses will be a lot more profitable and a lot smoother, and everybody will be a lot happier.
This is why Voice of Bold Business Radio exists, because these are topics that we hear about, we read about, other people talk about, but if we can get in there and share a little bit of our own experience, and if we can get in there and we can be real and say, I had to work on that too, or not only did I have to face that problem, the way I thought it was going to go, it didn't go that way, but maybe my learnings can help somebody else. This is a resource for all of us that are open-minded, willing for that self-reflection. And that comes down to this alignment of business values in our activities. Everything that has been shared on this program is describing that to a T. And I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about the fact that it's bold. It is bold to align our business values and our activities. And I want to hear from you, Ryan, what makes it bold to align our business values and our personal values with the activities that we engage in?
Yeah, it's extremely bold because business usually puts you in the eye of the public. And whenever you're truly aligned with the business that you're in, you're basically exposing yourself and your truest values, who you really are, to the eyes of the public, and that can be extremely vulnerable. So to be able to do that for yourself, to put yourself in the face of your business without persona, just being who you really are, is extraordinarily bold. And that's, I think if more business owners did that more often, they'd be so much more successful. Because how can you attract your ideal customers who want you if they never see you?
You heard it here. We talked about the importance of knowing what we mean, meaning what we say, using our voice. And that's the way we know that the activities we're doing, the activities that are necessary for our team to do to achieve business goals, are in alignment with who each of our people are, as well as who we are as a collective team delivering our product or service. So let's keep this story going. Hashtag VBB Radio, and subscribing to YouTube, following us, Red Direction Consulting, on Facebook, rating us on iTunes are all ways to stay engaged and become part of this conversation. So, depending on where you're at, depending on what you're trying to do, you may have been like, man, you know, everything they're talking about is way over my head. Well, you know what? That's great, because you know it's way over your head. Others of you are going to be like, oh, I know I do that and I still don't get the results I want. That's a juicy place to be, because there's some fuel there to work with, provided we're willing to look at it. And I'm saying we because I'm part of that group sometimes too. And there are some of us who are like, oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yeah, of course, of course, of course. And we're getting validation. We're getting the tools to be able to reflect and look at what's around us. And the validation is what we're doing working? Is what we're doing not working? And that's what these conversations at the Voice of Bold Business are all about. You're going to find the program notes at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P159. That is voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 159. You may also search Align Business Values and Activities. Share your story and experience. Add to the conversation. We, the leaders today, are defining what it means for leadership, for effectiveness, for the results that we want, both from people, profits, as well as our planet. And I'm curious to hear from you. How well does your company align business values and activities?
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.